Black Sea. Here with us is the Honorable Adrian Cioroianu, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, manager of the National Library of Romania, and Mr. George Scutaru, CEO of New Strategy Center think tank, former National Security Advisor to the Romanian President.
Good afternoon.
And also with us from the United States is the Honorable Ulrich Brechbuhl, former Counselor of the Department of State and Acting Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy. I hope we have the link.
We do, absolutely. It's a pleasure to be there and join.
Thank you, thank you. I know it's very late for you there, but I hope this discussion will be an occasion to say some interesting thing about the Romanian-American relationship. We are celebrating here the 4th of July. First of all, I will start with Professor Cioroianu, who is also an accomplished historian, and I will ask him to explain us a little bit how the Black Sea came to be such an important place, not only for our security, but also for the security of all the Western world.
Thank you very much, Sabin Orcan. A pleasure to see you, Ambassador Zuckerman, Mr. Nawaz Salameh. Good afternoon to all of you. Listen, in my opinion, Black Sea was, just imagine that between the 16th century and the 20th century, between Russia and Turkey, they had 12 wars, and some of them involved the Romanians or the Romanian territories. Most of them involved the Black Sea. That's my first conclusion. In my opinion, the key of the politics and geopolitics of the Black Sea is this relation between Turkey, which for the moment it's a country allied with the United States, with Romania and so on. It's a NATO country. Turkey and Russia, their relation, it's something really pivotal for the Black Sea wider region. And I will try to explain, for instance, in our history, the first ruler who really had the, let's say, a geopolitical, in a way futuristic perspective of the Black Sea was Stephen the Great. Stephen the Great at the end of the 15th century. I will explain you later.
Mr. Scutaru, please tell us what are, in your opinion, the greatest challenges and threats in the Black Sea after the war started in Ukraine. Even though the fighting is not so far from Romania, many of us have the feeling that nothing can happen to our country thanks to our NATO allies and to our American friends, their military presence here. Please tell us what we are relying on when we are feeling secure a couple hundred kilometers from the war.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Ambassador Zuckerman. Thank you very much, Mr. Salameh, for your disponibility to host this such important event. Yes, you are very right, Sabin, that indeed Romania is very close to the biggest threats for Europe's security. And I think that Romania is playing one of the most important role in our 30 decades of history, because Romania is a hub for support of Ukraine. Now we are playing the role, and I think the profile of Romania will be different in the next decade, because it's necessary to develop this strategic partnership with the United States, because the fight of Ukraine is not a fight between two countries, between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. It's a fight between autocracy and democracy. And I pretty believe that if we failed and Russia will win the war, First of all, the image of the United States will be serious damage, more than what's happened in Afghanistan, for instance. And secondly, I think that Romania could play an important role because you have, as you very well discussed in the first panel of our event, we have a lot of resources of energy in the Black Sea. And Romania could be, and I hope that in next period, especially because of this the gas perimeters in the Black Sea, you can play a very important role, including this process of reconstruction of Ukraine. We mentioned the developments made by Black Sea oil and gas, but also will develop in short time in 2027 we'll have in the first quarter the first molecule of gas from Neptune deep perimeters. Each year Romania will have possibility to assure between 7 and 8 billion cubic meters of gas, will be the biggest provider in the EU to other countries. And it's very important for Romania because Romania could be a bridge for American companies, from Western companies to Ukraine, to be located here in Romania, to be under Article 5 umbrella, to have direct contact with energy resources, cheaper, and to have possibility to be part of reconstruction process of Ukraine.
Thank you. Mr. Breckbull, I want to start asking you, what was your role as a counselor of the Department of State? And also, what was the main goal of previous administration, Trump administrations, in terms of security in Europe and especially in the Black Sea? Please.
Well, thank you very much for including me. It's always great to be able to visit with some of my old friends in Romania and to have the opportunity to meet some new folks. Those of you that have had the chance to see my bio know that I have close ties to Europe and spent quite a bit of time during my time at the department working on the European front. To be very succinct, I would tell you that I think there really were two primary objectives on the part of President Trump and his foreign policy during our period of service. One was to ensure that the deterrence model, if you will, was tough and strong and working, because I think President Trump committed to the American people that we would not, spend and waste U.S. treasure and blood, a third time over the course of 100 years in Europe. And in order to do that, I think the second point was that he felt very strongly, and all of us worked hard to make sure that Europe was engaged in its own defense to a level that, frankly, since the end of the World War II, it had not been. I think it's worth spending a moment or two to just sort of highlight a little bit of where sort of that came from. But before I do that, you asked the first question there was really more about the role, and I'll just spend a second because a lot of people hear counselor and they assume that means in some way, shape, or form legal counsel. It couldn't be further from the truth. In this case, I am not a lawyer, never have been, never will be. But the counselor was actually a role that was set up at the State Department over 100 years ago with the intent of being the number 2 official, because the Secretary of State started to travel and people became convinced that they needed to have someone in Washington to serve as the number 2. Obviously, we eventually evolved our structure, and the counselor and established a Deputy Secretary of State, and the counselor became an undersecretary level position with an undefined portfolio. I happen to be a West Point classmate of Secretary Pompeo, and have known him obviously since our days at West Point. And so, based on a 40-year relationship, he asked me to come and help him, and frankly, my job became very focused on cleaning up trouble spots and dealing with some of the tough issues. So let's talk for a second about sort of some of the bigger picture issues with regard to the situation that President Trump found himself in when he took over as president in early 2017. And I think there's a lot of consistency with sort of U.S. foreign policy in the previous 14 presidential administrations. These are, I would say, sort of 6 consistent tenets. The support of freedom and democracy worldwide, the rule of law, support of human rights, free markets, capitalism, entrepreneurship, and innovation. And I think during that period, it was really unquestioned that the U.S. would single-handedly guarantee Western Europe's freedom and prosperity. And it shouldn't fall on far from view that was all happening. Despite increasing European wealth and prosperity. The rise of China in the beginning of the Obama administration, really the 12th administration, the situation was a bit different. You had a U.S. economy that was running huge deficits, a U.S. budget, I should say, a federal government. We were losing jobs, and the economy was under duress. We had lots of immigration challenges, et cetera. And President Trump really sort of decided to implement those tenets and support those tenets, but do it in a different way. And so I'd like to just highlight a couple things, and we can get into in further detail in a minute. But he decided that he was going to put American people and American national security first, because he believed that a strong America was good for democracy and freedom on a worldwide basis. I think he thought and wanted us to deal with the world the way it was, in a realistic fashion, and not a way in which we wished it was. And he felt that we needed to implement policies to shape the world to be the way it wanted to be, as opposed to living with it the way it was. And as such, wanted to reestablish the deterrence model that President Reagan had so successfully used to help end the Cold War.
Mr. Bregul, I want to ask you this specifically. I don't want to politicize this debate, but I want to ask you this specifically because I saw in the media that the support for Ukraine has a bipartisan support in Congress, so it doesn't matter. Almost every member of the Republican Party in the Congress are agreeing that the United States should help Ukraine right now. And also we saw some bipartisan initiatives to increase the military presence here in Romania. Maybe we'll speak with Mr. Scutaro about that in a minute. But I wanted to ask you, did you see there is a difference between the policy of the United States in terms of security in the Black Sea, in Europe, between the administrations? What is different now, and what do you think is wrong or is not going well?
Yeah, so I think there obviously was no invasion of Ukraine during the previous administration, and I don't think that was an accident. We worked very hard to establish the deterrence model, and I suspect during this conversation we will talk about energy policy and how it impacted that, because from our perspective, the two were incredibly interlinked. Our view was that a lot of the troublemakers have a tremendous amount of energy resources at their disposal, and our view was that we needed to ensure U.S. energy independence and be able to use that to keep energy prices low and therefore bad actors around the world unable to implement their policies. Deterrence starts at the front line. It doesn't start in the back. And so I think that's why you saw during the Trump administration, we worked aggressively in Eastern Europe to establish partnerships, a number of which we established with Romania, and to ensure that up and down the Eastern European flank, the resources were in place to make sure that the Russians knew that fundamentally we were serious about Article 5 and that deterrence and our partnership was something that we would not back down from.
Thank you. Mr. Scutaro, what exactly it changed in the last 10 years in terms of relationship between us and the United States? Because we have this, I think, more than 2 decades, this partnership, this strategic partnership. We enforce that with NATO allies, but also some special military operations with the USA in Afghanistan and some other places. But then in the last years we have a law in Congress about which is specifically talking about Black Sea, and also we have this memorandum signed between our presidents, between Mr. Trump and Mr. Iohannis, about some mutual collaboration with nuclear power energy and communications and stuff like that, more than just a military cooperation. What is the significance of that?
By far, the most important domain is represented by military and intelligence. But I think that our partnership still has a lot of space for improvement, especially in the economic field. You mentioned nuclear domain, and you have this project for small nuclear reactors, and Romania will be the first country in the world will host this new American technology after the US. And I think that we have renewable, other domain, but at the same time it's necessary to have a long-term political commitment of the United States dedicated to the Black Sea region, not only to Romania. And it's great to have now this initiative assumed by Senator Shaheen from Democrat Party and Mitt Romney from Republican Party. We have 11 senators in the Senate who are co-sponsoring this initiative, and 5 representatives in the House. It would be great if you can have this bill passed in the Congress this year before to have elections in the United States. And the question is, why the Black Sea matters for the US? And I like maps, and I prepare a few maps for you. If it's possible to show the first one. And it's necessary to advocacy in the Congress and to present Americans why the Black Sea matters for the United States. And if you could put the first map on the screen, it would be great. This is the Black Sea. Black Sea, it's a corridor between Asia, between Central Asia and Europe. Black Sea means Middle East, North Africa, access to North Africa and Mediterranean Sea, access to Balkans, means grain, food security, and energy. And I want to show the next map because we discussed about food security. This green line represents the grain route from Odessa to Bosphorus to Turkish Straits. It is a route established in August last year by the United Nations together with Russian Federation, Ukraine, and Turkey. And using this route, Ukraine is exported more than 32 million tons of grain to entire world, especially North Africa and the Middle East. And we know, for instance, how important is Israel for the US security. And by the way, Egypt is most important, it's very important for Israeli security. And Israel is assuring entire amount of grain from Black Sea countries, from Russian Federation, Ukraine, and Romania. For instance, from Romania is flowing 20% of grain necessary to Egypt. You have also a teeny spot near to this green line, Snake Island, a sensitive spot in the western basin of the Black Sea, because when the Russian Federation invaded Ukraine in the first day, they occupied Snake Island and they established a naval blockade between Snake Island and the Crimea. Each day at the time, Ukraine has lost it $160 million per day, and Romania became the first route for Ukraine export. Even now, through Romania, Ukraine is exporting each day cereals and agriculture products, and Romania helped Ukraine to export more than 22 million tons of grains. food security, and energy also. I mentioned energy, and we have around 200 billion cubic meters on entire economic exclusive zone, and the most prolific perimeter, Neptune Deep, has 100 billion cubic meters. Just to understand better what means, for instance, 100 billion cubic meters, Republic of Moldova has an annual consumption of 1.5 billion, Bulgaria 2.6. Romania has capacity to cut this malign influence of Russian Federation, of Gazprom, as for a decade at minimum. And also will have capacity to not only to export, as you already discussed in the first panel, but also to provide to companies, to foreign companies, the energy necessary for the next step, next important step, the reconstruction process of Ukraine.
Thank you. Professor Ciorianu, do you think only the strong military presence here will solve the problem, or there is any room for diplomacy anymore in the Black Sea? Because you already mentioned the past wars in the Black Sea, the relation between Russia and Turkey. In the last 2 decades, Russia waged 2 wars in the Black Sea against Georgia and then against Ukraine. There is room for diplomacy, or is just about the war and waiting the end of it?
Fortunately, always there is a room for diplomacy. That's the reason I told you that I am really happy, as I told you, Sabine, that at least the Turkish president, Erdogan, tried to manage a kind of corridor, for instance, for the cereals, but not only cereals, a kind of corridor for a discussion between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Having all our, let's say, reticence regarding the political style of the Turkish president, who's, in my opinion, he's not a democrat in our understanding of the world, but the fact that he tried to establish a way of communication, for me, it's a very good sign of our times. So there is a room for diplomacy in every conflict, given the fact that the Black Sea, it's in a tremendous evolution since 1990. Just imagine that during the Cold War, the Black Sea was, let's imagine the Black Sea like a triangle. The Russians, the Soviet Union, they had 2 lines of the triangle, the west and the east, with Turkey, the NATO Turkey in the south. Today, NATO has 2 lines, the west, the northwest, starting probably from Ukraine in the future, until the south with Turkey, which is, as I said, Turkey, in my opinion, it's pivotal for our alliance. And the problem of Crimea, can we find a diplomatic solution for Crimea? Because for the moment, I can imagine only a military one, not a diplomatic one. Can we imagine that the Russians will renounce, will accept losing Crimea in the foreseeable future? Once again, I'm optimistic regarding the chances of diplomacy, but I'm afraid that some topics, as Crimea, for instance, will need a military solution.
But do you think there is because you are the Minister of Foreign Affairs and you know how these negotiations works, even in time of wars and behind the doors, with the closed doors, do you think there is something that Russia in the next future will accept to get out from Ukraine and maybe Crimea and accepting some security warranties for Ukraine? Do you think Russia will accept a rational solution?
That's a problem. Let me tell you one personal story. In April 2008, I was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I had the chance to organize the NATO summit in Bucharest. I was present in all the discussion regarding the chances for Ukraine to join NATO. A larger part of our friends and partners, from the Chancellor Angela Merkel to President Sarkozy, the French President Sarkozy, Italy, all of them said, no, Ukraine is not a viable, for the moment, not a viable partner in order to join NATO. So they don't receive the MAP, Membership Action Plan. Ukraine or Georgia, they didn't receive the MAP. Russians, they knew that. In the last day of the summit, the Russian President Vladimir Putin, he announced that I'll arrive in Bucharest knowing that the Ukrainians will not be accepted in the alliance. So they knew from the very beginning in 2008 that Georgia and Ukraine, they didn't have a real chance to join the alliance. And last year, Sabine, do you remember? What was the official position of the Russian president? Ukraine, it's a menace because they will enter NATO. NATO, please rewrite your history back to 1997 and so on. So they know the truth, but their narrative, it's purely aggressive and should I say sometime brazen.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. I will get back to Mr.
You were
Bregbold.
in the government too, I think.
No,
at the moment.
I was National Security Advisor a few years later.
Yeah.
I will get back to Mr. Bregbold in a second, but I want Mr. Scutaro to continue this idea because it is about propaganda. The Russians knew, they just presented the other way, and we are not in a direct war with Russia, we, Romania, and the United States. But there is a, there is a feeling that there is a Cold War still going around, and they are using everything to disrupt our democracy. In the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Romania, maybe. What is this kind of threat from Russia?
I think that we have this intellectual comfort to consider that we are not in the war with Russia, but they are considering that they are in the war with us. And they seem to be very poor on military domain up to now, but they are very good in hybrid domain. And they are using, first of all, disinformations. This is the reason why you have anti-Western, a liberal party in the second place now in Romania and our public opinion polls. We are in the war with Russia because they are trying to undermine the democracy in Romania, in other countries in Europe. They interfere in elections. And let's imagine that we'll have 11 elections in the EU area in the next period up to December 24, including elections for EU Parliament. And next year will be an electoral period for Romania with 4 elections. Will be a mess, by the way. But we discussed about Crimea. I think that Crimea is a red line for both countries. It's a red line for Zelensky and Ukraine because Crimea will represent a platform for the next attack to Crimea, even with Putin or other successor. Because I don't believe that the next after Putin will be, more democratic, And At the same time, this war for Ukraine is an existential war. They fight to survive. And President Putin mentioned very clear a few weeks ago in this meeting with bloggers, military bloggers, that objectives of the military operation remain the same. What means the same objective? To destroy Ukraine. And by the way, to destroy Ukraine is necessary to cut the Ukraine access to the Black Sea and to conquer the entire littoral of the Black Sea. This is for Romania, it's a nightmare to see Russia again on the Prut River, because I'm pretty sure if they will have possibility to create this land bridge between Crimea and Transnistria, they will occupy Republic of Moldova. They will not install a puppet regime in Chisinau, because we don't have more buffer zone. They occupy de facto Belarus. Now we have a full-scale warfare in Ukraine. They will not see Moldova like an experiment to have a buffer zone between West and East. They will occupy Republic of Moldova. And for Romania, this represents a nightmare in terms of security. For this reason, it's necessary to help Ukraine to resist, because it's necessary between Romania and Russian Federation to have a freedom and independent and democratic state Ukraine, despite all our bilateral problems. And by the way, you can see that even only now Romanians and Ukrainians are discovering each other. We are so close, but in the same time so far. And it's necessary to reestablish the partnership between Ukraine and Romania. And by the way, after the war, the US will have the closest friends here, Ukraine and Romania. And it's necessary to have this in mind, that this partnership with Ukraine will be so valuable for the United States in the same time.
Thank you. Mr. Breckbull, we mentioned in the first part of our debate a little bit about energy, the natural gas reserves in the Black Sea, and Romania being the second country in Europe in terms of proven reserves. Tell me a little bit about Nord Stream, you know, the project, controversial, but then it was this thinking with our European allies that if you have close relationship with Russia, they will give us gas, we will give them money, and we will keep it together, and they will be our friends forever. And it proves it was a very, very bad idea. We see this now. Every European country is committed, almost everyone is committed to cut the Russian gas and to find some other resources. Some of them are in Romania. Maybe we are not up to speed with exploiting these resources. What do you think about Nord Stream? What do you think about this dependence of Europe of the Russian gas in the last decades?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very relevant topic and question. You know, one of the things that I think we were highly focused on, and probably because we have the benefit of distance, geographic, and in other ways, it was no surprise, you know, to those of us that served in the previous administration, that a stronger tie, you know, and dependence, if you will, or an overdependence on Russian gas would be bad for Europe, plain and simple. I know, you know, our team made numerous trips. I personally made 4 or 5 trips to Germany and discussed with Chancellor Merkel's security advisor, as well as Foreign Minister Maas's security advisor, the fact that bypassing Ukraine through the building of Nord Stream 2 and Western Europe becoming that much more dependent on Russian gas could only be a bad thing. And unfortunately, you know, given some of the ties with some of the foreign, you know, the former political leaders, our message just didn't make it through. And you know, we worked when we came into office. Nord Stream 2 was 90+% finished. And we frankly spent 4 years working hard to prevent the remaining 10% from coming into effect. I think now, in hindsight, Western Europe understands that it wasn't some evil plot on the part of the United States to try to sell more liquid natural gas, but it had everything to do with diversifying energy sources and ensuring that you don't become overly dependent on someone who, frankly, doesn't share your values, democracy, freedom, all the things that we hold dear in the West. The Russians just don't share with us. And so to become overly dependent on them just made no sense to those of us looking at it from across the Atlantic. And hence, we were very aggressive in building alternative sources and capabilities and starting the conversation about Europe building more liquefied natural gas terminals to receive that and focusing away from both Middle Eastern as well as Russian energy sources. Those are not dependable. And anytime we allow ourselves and our future to be held in the hands of folks who don't share our values, we shouldn't expect good things to happen.
Do you think our collaboration between Romania and the United States will go on? We have some space to improve our relationship, like Mr. Scutaru said. Do you think no matter who is at the White House or who has the majority in Congress, this relationship will go on? Or do you think it depends on who wins the election in the United States?
No, I think regardless of who controls the House, regardless of who controls the White House, when folks actually have an opportunity to, they're in power, they're ruling. You look at things realistically, and you realize that Eastern Europe is absolutely critical. Especially, we haven't talked at all about the rise of China and Chinese interests. But I think anyone who looks at this in a sober fashion realizes that Europe and the United States or North America have got to work together, support each other to have the critical scale. When you look at all sort of future technologies and developments, they're all predicated on scale. When you add the United States economy and population to the European collective economy and populations, you have scale that is sufficient to compete and make the investments necessary to continue moving forward. And when I say to compete effectively with the Asian economic juggernaut, et cetera. So I think that there's lots of opportunity, and frankly, it's a real need for Eastern Europe, the United States, and frankly, we need to get Western Europe fully engaged as well. My sense from the vantage point I have here in the States is that Eastern Europe understands the absolute criticality of reestablishing deterrence. Frankly, remains to be seen whether Western Europe has. I know there's been some significant sacrifice, post the Ukrainian invasion. But at the end of the day, it's still the U.S. that bears by far the largest burden with supporting Ukraine. And I believe strongly that Western Europe has got to wake up and realize that it's not a matter of whether they'd like to or not. It's existential, and they've got to invest more heavily.
Thank you, Mr. Breckbull. I want to go back to Professor Cioreanu first. I was thinking about that before our debate because we both read a story about China saying again to Russia, don't use the nuclear weapon. So this is a red line. But I was thinking about that, Professor, that we are living in a paradoxical world. 30 years ago, when the Iron Curtain fell down, we were thinking, not only us, even great American thinkers, that we will have is the end of tyranny and we will have a peaceful world. But then I was thinking that maybe half of the countries in the world are not a democracy. They are autocracy, or however you define it, Mr. Scutaro defined it. Some of them have great resources. They are using it as a weapon, like Russia did with Europe, with the natural gas. It seems more complicated than we think 30 years ago. What do you think is how we navigate around this issue?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. In fact, I will be very honest with you, and I'll say that I was one of those guys who believed that Francis Fukuyama is right about speaking about the end of history. I really believed what the German rock band Scorpions sung about the wind of change in Russia. I believed that Russia will become, let's say, a country like us, a kind of, let's say, premature democracy. I believed that. In 2008, our political elite, including the president and the prime minister, including the former minister of foreign affairs, we believed that Dmitry Medvedev will represent a more liberal Russian president, a more liberal one. And I'm afraid that the American President Barack Obama believed that too at that moment. So, on one hand, Russia, it's always, as Churchill said, an enigma, wrapped in a riddle and so on. On the other hand, history shows us that Russia had a kind of spiral evolution after an autocrat. Sometimes a more liberal ruler can be expected from, I don't know, from the history of the Tsars until now. They had their nightmare, as Giorgio Scutaro just said, our nightmare is that problem of Russia gaining Republic of Moldova, but the Russians too, they had a kind of nightmare if Ukraine, Poland, and Romania will be fully integrated in the Western world. That's the reason I, like probably you, Sabine Orkan, I have some, let's say, question mark regarding our failures in order to gain the Schengen space. Probably, including the Russians, probably they are involved in that affair. But anyhow, that's the problem. That's my answer to your question. The problem with Russia is they are not predictable. That's the fragility of the democratic world. In theory, all our democracies are more or less predictable. Russia is not predictable. We really don't know what will happen after Putin. Everything can... Every type of the
we'll hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Giorgio Scutaro,
I remember this picture with Madam Hillary Clinton and Mr. Lavrov one day reset, the press the button of the relationship of the relation between the Russian Federation and the US. And now we discovered that Medvedev is one of the strongest representative of militaristic Russia, okay? It's so far from that picture with so Democrat guy with good English and his discussion with Americans at the time. We feed the beast with our goodwill and money starting with 2008. We missed the opportunity to counter Russia and to have a real deterrence. We had different approaches regarding the Baltic areas, in the Black Sea. We moved troops in the Baltic areas. Even Russia has acted kinetically only in the Black Sea, attacked Georgia in 2008, and after annexed Crimea in 2014. We missed this opportunity after the annexation of Crimea to be really independent in terms of energy in the Europe. We believe that our money and for cheaper gas from the Russia will transform Putin into a more predictable ruler. And now we see the problem of German economy, because the German economic philosophy is based on cheaper gas from Russia. And because it's important to see where is Romania in this very difficult and global picture. And if you can put this third map on the screen, and to explain why it's important to support in Ukraine and to see the victory. The next one. Look, one of the specificity of the Black Sea is the lack of international waters. We have only economic exclusive zones, and you can see. On the left, the economic exclusive zone before the annexation of Crimea and after the annexation of Crimea. Of course, de facto, we are not recognizing the annexation, but de jure not recognizing the annexation, but de facto, our neighbor now on economic exclusive zone is Russian Federation. And our objective is necessary to see the previous picture, to see that our economic zone is near to Ukrainian economic exclusive zone, and to avoid the Russian hybrid activities. And I show you the next pictures. Red perimeters represent all perimeters blocked by Russians in 2019 with military exercises, with NEP exercises. It's a legal practice, but they organize a lot of exercises, block the freedom of navigation in the Black Sea. And on the right, you can see 5 perimeters blocked by Russians between July and August 2019. They block 1/4 of the entire surface of the Black Sea. And below you can see the perimeters with gas reserve, Black Sea oil and gas, OMV Rom gas. You can see perimeter Sakarya, very important for Turkey. And also you can see that a part of these red perimeters already cover our economic exclusive zone. It's important to be prepared for the next period, when Romania will start to build up our strategic infrastructure in the Black Sea, and to be aware that Russia is very possible to come to harass us and to try to postpone our process to build up strategic infrastructure. And on the right, you have, I mentioned on the map, Zatoka Bridge. This is a very important bridge, it's a railway bridge between Odessa and the Romanian ports on the Danube. On the February 10th, Russians used for the first time a naval kamikaze drone, and they hit the bridge. They put on the social media the image and a video with this fact, just to show the muscle. It's important to have in mind also these possible activities under false flag, because drones have a very low footprint on radar, and it's necessary to be prepared. Also, please take into account that the straits are closed by Turks because of Montreux Convention. We don't have now any American vessel in the Black Sea. We can count only on our own naval capabilities, and unfortunately, we have a very less capabilities, we Bulgarians. We have to face to the risk of mines. We destroy, I mean, Ukrainians, Romanian, Bulgarians, Turks, and even Georgians, more than 80 mines. And it's a very crowded space. I mentioned the importance of Romania for the Ukrainian export. And each day you have in front of Sulina port, in front of Constanța, and around 120, 150 ships.
Ukrainian ships?
No, from other countries because they are waiting to be loaded with Ukrainian grain for the Ukrainian export. And for this reason, it's important to see more Americans' assets on the shore, especially because 80% of our military contracts are signed with Americans. By far, we try to be more integrated with American troops, and it's necessary to move from the rotational presence to the permanent presence. In the same time, Romania is necessary to invest more in these capabilities, for host nation capabilities, but in the same time, for the US, it's important to be engaged for long term in the Black Sea. I understand that China is representing the biggest challenge than Russia. And probably it's difficult to have this strategic dilemma to play with two hot potatoes in the same time with Russia and China. But if the US will act like a fireman to solve a problem, and after 20 years to come in the same place to solve the same problem, it's a huge mistake, because Russians will come. I don't believe that even after Putin will have a democratic, as Professor Cioroianu mentioned, for Russians, Peter is great, or Catherine is great, not for their own reforms. They are great because they added territories to Russia. And Putin wants to be Vladimir the Great, not for reforms in Russia, but for the annexation of Crimea, for the annexation of Ukraine, for the annexation of Republic of Moldova. And please believe this behavior will remain. And especially we will see after this Prigozhin episode that Putin will be worse and worse in the relationship with Ukraine. With this war, we don't expect to see a peaceful solution in a few months, and it's necessary to be prepared for an attrition war and to be prepared for Russian intervention with hybrid instruments, especially disinformation, and they are using anti-Western parties, because the real danger for us is this war fatigue. If the West will decrease the level of support for Ukraine, finally Ukraine will lose this war, because even they are so brave, it's necessary to have ammunition, to have enough armament, and this ammunition and armament are coming for the West, for the United States in the first place. And it's necessary to understand that this is our fight, our common fight against autocracy.
Sabine, could I interject for a second there?
Yeah, sure.
And make
Go
a
ahead.
comment or two?
Yeah, please.
I mean, it comes back to the point I made at the beginning, that one of the differences, while I described the 6 tenets that President Trump's foreign policy shared with previous administrations, I mentioned that one of the commitments was that we needed to look at the world as it was, not as we wished it was. Because going back to why people perceived that Russia might be friendlier, et cetera, it's because what we all wanted to believe. Despite the fact that there were already signs then that in fact that wasn't the case, that the values were not yet broadly shared and had not dug in. And so the situation that we find right now, I think, in large part, is that deterrence. We sort of have realized that again, collectively, the West, that deterrence is important. It's sort of why the United States worked so hard to try to get all of Europe, not just a select number of European countries, to live up to the Wales Commitment, because fundamentally, we all don't want to think that China, has potential to cause mischief. But the fact of the matter is that that's wishful thinking as well. They have stated very clearly, and anyone who has studied sort of the Chinese leadership and statements, et cetera, knows that they have a very specific timeline and set of goals. And right now, when you look at it, the United States is really the only country that has the resources and ability to provide deterrence there in Asia, which makes it all the more important that Western Europe step up. Eastern Europe is stepping up. Western Europe needs to step up. And it's interesting because as I listen to the conversation, I realized that everyone else is talking about Europe as if it were one and the same. And I realized the European Union, what have you, what have you. But from the American standpoint, my seat here in the States, Europe is different. There are two Europes. There's Eastern Europe and there's Western Europe. And Europe has got to get on the same sheet of music, and they've got to realize that fundamentally, European security is something that everyone has to participate in, whether your border is directly bordering Russia, such as, we talked about the economic exclusive zones now, and how the Romanian EEZ borders, the de facto Russian one, or whether you're back in the UK or France, and you're hundreds of kilometers away. Deterrence is not something that you flip a switch and it's there today. Deterrence needs to be built by everything that is said, everything that is done, and the investments made. And I think Eastern Europe has got to put a lot more pressure on Western Europe to fundamentally make the investments and live up to the commitments, the Wales commitments, and fundamentally, carry the weight.
Thank you, Mr. Bragbul. Professor Cioranu will have the final word. One Romanian president once famously said that the Black Sea is actually a Russian lake. It is or not, because I saw this map of that Mr. Scutaru show us. It's kind of a Russian lake. They block all the movement in the Black Sea, and also we are constrained by this Montreal Treaty. So we don't have allies here. We don't have the ships that we need, Mr. Scutaru. That's real.
Yeah,
that is real. Even though we pledge, we are, I think, the first country that pledged 2% of the GDP for the army, for the defense. We don't have these ships yet. Probably we'll have it in the future. So it is a Russian lake after all, or not?
Not anymore, in my opinion. Even I was impressed by the maps that George Scutaru just showed us. And probably you will tell us how can be legal to have military exercises during a period, I suppose, during some weeks, or you said that it's legal to organize such a military. But anyhow, for the 18th century, the 19th century, even during the Cold War, indeed, Black Sea was a kind of Russian lake. Nowadays, the key are in Turkish hands, the straits, Dardanelles and Bosphorus, from the Aegean Sea to the Marmara Sea and to Black Sea during the Bosphorus. So this is our chance. And sincerely, in my opinion, I cannot be a prophet in my own country, but I think Romania will be, in a way, pressed by our partners in order to reorganize our naval force. In a couple of decades, I think Romania will be forced to represent something important in the NATO naval capabilities on the Black Sea. If not, will be at the mercy of the Russians, military speaking. Even it's true that the nature of the war changed a little bit, given the fact that the flagship Moskva was attacked by some drones, I suppose, or anyhow, a kind of missile, and the flagship of the Russian fleet was destroyed, fortunately, in the very first 2 months of the war, I think. Anyhow, in last year, springtime. So the nature of the war, it's natural, it's changing, but in the same time, I'll close my remarks saying that we are naturally and logically obliged to be partners with Ukraine, with Poland. Their fate, it's our fate. History shows us that the fate of Poland was the fate of Romania and vice versa. That's the reason I began with Stefan the Great. His efforts in order to conquer Chilia and Cetatea Albă, the White Citadel. Chilia and the White Citadel today are on the Ukrainian territory in the northwest of the Black Sea. Those fortress for what Stefan the Great fought the middle of the 15th century. So 500 years ago, Stefan was probably one of the first European leaders who understood that the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, was advancing from the south to the north. Nowadays, Russia, are they on the are they advancing anymore? I don't think so. That's the reason I think, knowing the president that you mentioned, President Băsescu, the Black Sea is not anymore a Russian lake. And once again, fortunately, the keys and the straits are in the Turkish hands. At least for the moment, Turkey is one of our friends and partners.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Bregbull. I understand it's a late hour with you. We are pleased that you were able to talk with us. Thank you, Mr.
It was a pleasure.
Cioroianu, Mr. Scutaru.
Thank you very much.
I was ready to just say thank you all, but then I remember a story, a great story, from one of the books of Mr. Professor Cioroianu. You know that we were able to unite Romania after the First World War, thanks to an American president, Woodrow Wilson. And I read that because the Prime Minister couldn't negotiate with him, he called Regina Maria. She went to the Paris press conference, and I read about how she convinced Woodrow Wilson to help Romania be a bigger country. And someone said because she didn't speak about the past of Romania, she speak about the future of Romania.
Yeah.
And she said if Romania is not strong and big, the Bolsheviks could come here. If it's big and strong, you could come here and you will have a great ally. And I was thinking about that because it's very important for our discussion. And I think the future is great for our countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.